I'm also pleased that the Scottish Affairs Committee, of which I am a member, and the Welsh Affairs Committee have secured this debate to mark 20 years of devolution. It's an important landmark in the history of the United Kingdom and an appropriate time to reflect on progress we have made towards more representative and more effective government in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland when we get that assembly back as well. Over the last 20 years, Scotland has seen multiple rounds of devolution. It was a Conservative-led government that oversaw the Scotland Acts 2012-2016, which devolved additional powers to the Scottish Parliament, making it one of the most powerful devolved legislators in the world today. The Scottish Affairs Committee's recent report into intergovernmental relations highlighted the many other upheavals that have influenced the devolution settlement during that time, including the change of government in 2007 and the independence referendum in 2014. And it's clear that the devolution settlement that Scotland enjoys today is very different to the one that was created back in 1999. And with 111 additional powers due to be devolved from Brussels to Holyrood as we leave the European Union, 87 immediately and another 24 to follow, it will soon be changing further. As Member of Parliament for Banff and Buchan, the heartland of Scottish fishing, I know that my constituents will be glad to see overall fisheries policy determined closer to home, rather than by distant bureaucrats on the continent. I also know that many of them have been frustrated by the SNP's apparent desire to keep all those powers in Brussels by keeping us in the EU and, of course, by association, the common fisheries policy. Brexit or no Brexit, however, it's right that the UK and Scottish governments should be investigating how intergovernmental relations can be improved. But this is not the time for talk of radically rewriting the devolution settlement. While we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of devolution as a whole, it's worth recognising that the last Scotland Act came into force just 3 years ago. In fact, we're still implementing that last rewrite of the devolution settlement, and earlier this year it emerged that the SNP-run Scottish Government will not be ready for the full devolution of welfare powers until 2024.
What's that?
This from the same party that told voters in 2014 that they could set up a whole new country in just 18 months. Instead of plotting a rematch against the voters on independence or devising increasingly left-field proposals to overhaul the devolution settlement yet again, the focus of this review should be on ensuring that the devolution settlement we've got is implemented smoothly and effectively. I'll give way in there.
I think it's a very interesting point, Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable member is making about the devolution settlement. We in the Highlands and Islands identify something of a democratic deficit in that we feel that our voice is not being heard by those in power in Edinburgh. Power is being dragged out of the Highlands to Edinburgh. This does not suit Highland people, and what happens is you get elected members turning around and blaming the Howling Council, for instance. Well, they get their money from the Scottish Government. Can I make this point? I believe there should be a minister for the Highlands and Islands in whatever government of whatever colour who would speak up the Highlands and Islands and would actually exercise some power to the good of the Highlands and Islands. We don't have it at the moment, and we should have it.
For his point, and I'm going to raise a very similar point about the north east of Scotland, where I'm from, which will come as no surprise. I mean, the work involved in this review is vital if the Scottish people are going to enjoy the good governments they deserve from both Westminster and Holyrood governments. I was pleased, therefore, that the UK Government's response to the Committee report on intergovernmental affairs, which showed its commitment to such a review. It remains to be seen, however, if the Scottish Government will put the interests of the Scottish people first and work constructively with the UK Government. Or will we get more of the same from the SNP? The party that is delaying the implementation of the Scotland Act 2016, particularly on welfare, as I've mentioned, and desperately trying to keep agricultural and fisheries policy under Brussels control by staying in the EU. The party whose own Brexit minister has said he doesn't like the devolved settlement. The party that ran roughshod over the procedures of the Scottish Parliament and the advice of its presiding officer to ram their continuity bill only persuades it to be struck down by the Supreme Court. The choice is theirs, and I hope for the sake of all the Scottish people that they choose a more constructive path. If they fail to do so, then I suspect that come 2021, when we have the next Holyrood elections, the Scottish people will bring that nationalist era to an end and elect a new government that will take that constructive approach, with Ruth Davidson as First Minister, yes. Like the majority of people in Scotland, the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party support the Union. We are invested in the devolution settlement and we want it to succeed. And this is because localism is a core Conservative principle. And is a source of endless disappointment to me and to my constituents in the North East that the spirit of devolution, of decisions being taken closer to home, is not taking root entirely within the Scottish Government. Successive Labour and SNP Scottish governments have hoarded power in Holyrood and governed primarily, it's been suggested, for the Central Belt. While English city regions are getting more control over their own affairs to accompany growth deals, Nicola Sturgeon is ensuring that Scotland remains rigidly centralised. Scotland's diversity from region to region across the whole of Scotland is one of the many things that makes Scotland a nation which I am proud to call home. A nation that my immigrant wife is proud to call home. And it's tragic that the political structures that the SNP have imposed on our nation do not reflect that. And when the revenue grant for local authorities in the North East is falling by 40 million a year, or this year, even when the SNP have made Scotland the highest taxed part of the UK and the North East taxed more than most areas in Scotland, it is clear to see that the North East is missing out. My message for the Scottish Government on this anniversary is simple. It's time to work constructively with the UK Government to make the most of the existing devolution settlement and ensure that the new powers coming to Holyrood from both Westminster and Brussels are transferred smoothly and effectively. Yes, I'll give way to the Honourable Committee Member.
Well, gentleman and colleague on the Scottish Affairs Committee for giving way. He talks a lot about the constructive working of the two governments together. At the time of the Scotland Act, the 2016 Scotland Act, of course, I believe it was something like over 100 amendments this party put forward in those debates that were completely ignored by this government. Would he describe that as constructive working?
I wouldn't necessarily recognise, and I thank my honourable committee fellow member for her intervention, but I wouldn't necessarily recognise the voting against of those amendments as effectively ignoring. But we just voted against them because we didn't agree with them. I mean, that's how democracy works, I'm afraid. So, in summary, it's time for a fair deal for the North East and more powers for local and regional communities across Scotland. It's time to respect the fact that, although the Scottish people voted for devolution 20 years ago, at no point, either in 2014 or in any election since then, have the people of Scotland expressed a desire to break up the United Kingdom.